TikTok, it's time to rock. Welcome to the Van Halen show here on the 5150 channel. It's my pleasure, folks, to introduce to you the co-hosts of this show with me. We've got John, also known as Conks, and we've got Tanner down there below holding us up. Good to see you, Tanner.
How's it going?
What's up, fellas?
Good, bro.
Cheers.
Beers. Okay, he's got beer o'clock. John,
Got root beer.
good to see. Yeah, grab a root beer. Good to see you, John. We want to do a special shout out to our brother who's normally hanging out with us, who can't join us because he's on a gig. So Jimmy V, God bless you, bro.
Break a leg, Jimmy.
Break a leg, Jimmy. We've got a special show, John and Tanner. We've got a special guest that's going to be popping in pretty soon to join us, and we're going to hang out with him and talk about this album and this tour, John. We'll never get sick and tired of talking about this album or this tour, do we, John?
Never. 40 years later, still talking about it. Hey, hello to Simon in the chat, Andy in the chat already. We got a couple guys in there.
Fantastic. Yeah. It's good to see these guys, and we're going to do a shout out. John will do a shout out soon to everybody. But we were just doing a bit of planning before we went live, which is typical here on the Van Halen show, isn't it? You know, so we're going to come back and do a full EVH show debrief, aren't we? With Jimmy probably in a week's time, maybe a couple of weeks. But I think, Tanner, it's probably a good time for us anyway to acknowledge the success and the fun that you guys had at EVH Con, Tanner.
It was incredible. Yeah, I can't wait to talk about it more, but it was really awesome to meet some of the people that I've been talking to on the internet here for some people upwards of about 10 years now. Like it was insane to and I really liked the part at the end when John, Les, and Jimmy and I all got together all in one screen, and it was pretty honestly pretty emotional for me. It was pretty cool to be in one room with all the guys that I consider as my best friends or whatever. So yeah,
it was one of the great ones this year. This may have been the best one that I was at most of them. I missed last year's, but this one was a special one. I think very special one. And young Tanner on the drums was very impressive. Joe Suma texted me the next day and he goes, "Man, Tanner is great on the drums, man. He just totally killed it." So Tanner, be prepared next year, okay?
I have a better idea of how I'm gonna do it, but
right. Exactly. So now you know, right? So, but Tanner was great. The drums sounded phenomenal this year, really cool with the hybrid Simmons kit there. Just it's totally Van Halen. It was great. So we got to see a lot of people that we see every year. That that's the nice thing about it is that now this has been going on about almost 10 years, EVH Con. So you see these people, you look forward to one day of the year that you see all these people, and and it's great because you just pick up where you left off last year. So it's a great time, and you know what, I even though that one was, it says the 2024 EVH Con, or was whatever, I think there's going to be another 2024 EVH Con later this year. So
Brilliant.
yeah, so
Brilliant. Awesome. So I look forward for us to do a show and go in depth on that, because there's a lot for us to talk about.
yeah, definitely.
Before I get you to introduce our guest, John, I just want to do a shout out to you and Jimmy Live for organising the stream for us for that show. It was fantastic. We streamed for about 5 hours. We had a lot of people watching, and a lot of people got a lot of enjoyment out of watching the stream and recognising people that they knew, and being blown away by the musical contributions by people, like you say, by Tanner, as an example. So, thank you to you and Jimmy for organising that stream, because without it, we wouldn't have had,
you know what? Next time, maybe we can make it better. Maybe we can use those, like a PZM microphone or something that'll give us better sound or something. Tanner, we'll figure something out, because it, literally, to be honest with you, it took me 5 minutes to do that. I went on Amazon. I ordered a microphone stand clip for an iPad, and in the middle of Joe's store, he's got like a metal conduit that comes down from the ceiling, and it has a power outlet in it, and there's a couple little couches around it so people can sit and try out amplifiers and stuff. And the clamp I had fit perfectly on the on that conduit coming down. I literally threw the iPad, asked for the Wi-Fi password and information, and let it put the stuff in for the show, and that was it. And didn't look at it until the end of the night. So I know some people had problems with the sound or whatever, that they didn't like it, but it was loud in there at times. So maybe next EVH Con, we'll figure out something to get a little better sound. We'll work on that.
Okay, good on you, bro, and appreciate that. But yeah, thank you, bro. So do you want to talk about our guest?
Yeah,
and then we'll throw him into the show, and then we can ask him some questions. And if folks in the chat have some questions, we'll endeavour to get him to answer some of those questions.
Definitely. So as everybody knows, we're kind of this year we're kind of celebrating the 40th anniversary of 1984. This whole year, any 1984 content we can find, we'll be on it. And so we did 2 shows on the making of the record already, and now we're going to shift into starting to talk about the tour and things like that. And so this fits perfectly into it. This came highly recommended. Greg Renoff loved this book, and it's just a great book. And anybody that grew up in the 80s, or even if you didn't grow up in the 80s, and this book, one of the reviews of the book said that it basically, it's like the movie Stand By Me and Sandlot, with electric guitars and Eddie Van Halen. You know what I mean? It's like, it's a great book about it. Brought me back because I have so much in common with these guys, and I guess a lot of us of that age do. Andrew, we were talking about that before the show. But it's just a great book. It's a great read, and I highly recommend it to everybody that's a Van Halen fan. It should go on your bookshelf with all the great Van Halen books by Chris Gill and by Greg Renoff, and this should be right there next to him. It's called Jump, the 40th anniversary of attending the 1984 Van Halen concert by Jim Serger, and with his buddies here, his childhood friends, Chris Berger, Jimmy Myers, Jim Myers, Todd Zimmerman, Skip Berger, and Mike Myers. I guess Jim Myers and Skip Berger are dads of 2 of his friends who play a huge part in this book, so which we'll talk about. But it's just a great read, and there's photos in it, and it's just brings you back to that decade of the 80s. And so I'd like to
it brings me back.
Yeah, right, exactly, especially because he wasn't alive during that time. So our guest tonight is Jim Serger, and we're going to talk about the book, everybody. Hey, Jim, can you hear us? You there, Jim? Can you hear us? Andrew, can you hear us?
Bueller?
Is Jim on mute? Jim's not on mute, is he?
No, he's His mic is going. Hey, Jim.
Jim can't hear us. No. Jim,
come back out and come back in, Jim.
Yeah, can you go back out and come back in? I don't know. Jim, can you hear me? Shake your head if you can hear me. No?
Okay. Can someone type a message
Let me see.
in the chat for me? Come back in the chat, Jim. Hold on. Go out and come back in, Jim. Good on you, bro. All right. While he's doing that, what we'll do is we'll just talk a little bit about this 1984 tour. Obviously, as Jim said, it's going to be a couple of shows on the channel talking about this. This is just the first one on the tour, Jim. So, sorry, John. All these Jims and Johns and gosh, and Tanners in my life. But we certainly look forward to talking about some of the 84 tours from your personal experience too, John.
Yeah, definitely. Anybody that lived in that era, all of us have some stuff in common with these guys in this book. So, like I said, it's a great read, and I'm just going to give a shout out to a couple guys guys and girls maybe in the chat here. We got Donald Young, Simon Williams, Andy Carson, Ryan Hall. Let's see who else we got in here. Randy Price. Let's see.
Hey, Randy.
Do you like that comment from the Rock Professor? You went analog.
Hey, Ben Tom. Yep, exactly.
Here he is. So let's see. Hopefully, sorry for interrupting, John.
Yeah, no, I think I got everybody in there. Ben Tom is the last
Jim.
one in.
I got you.
You got us.
Hey, Yay. Technology always works, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's great.
You just gotta switch it on, John and Jimmy and Tanner.
That's right.
Yeah, right. Exactly, right.
That's right.
Anyway,
Well, thanks for having me on today. I appreciate all three of you. I really do. Mm-hmm.
so
I can't
Jim,
thank you enough.
So Jim, you had written another book, I guess, at one point. What was your other book?
So this was my 7th book. So 15 years ago, I was at a conference, and a gentleman sat there in front of about 500 people, and he said, "Reading will change your life." And I said, "Boy, he doesn't know me. I haven't read a book since I graduated from college." At the end of the meeting, I won his book. So therefore, I felt compelled that I had to read it, right? And at the end of his book, he said, "Email me." So I emailed him, and he said, "Now go read another one." So in that 1 year, I read over 100 books.
What?
And then I started reading more. And then I got this idea that I'm going to write my first book with my dad. And we wrote a baseball book together on all of our baseball trips all across the United States. And it did really well. And my first publishing company picked it right up out of Advantage Media out of Charleston, South Carolina. So I was 1 for 1. I was like,
wow,
holy cow.
That's pretty good.
So then it snowballed from there, you guys. I felt the bug. I enjoyed the bug. I rode a bicycle from Carmel, Indiana to Orlando, having not been on a road bike in 15 years.
Wow.
And this little bike shop showed me how to do it. And within 9 months, I went from zero experience riding a bicycle on the highway to I made it all the way down to Orlando in 7 days.
Wow.
So I wrote a customer service book for them. Just from a complete stranger, they reeled me in and they turned me into a bicycling expert. And I haven't bicycled since that day 9 years ago. Okay.
That was my next question. Have you ridden a bicycle?
Mission complete, John. Once that was over with, we're on to something else.
Next.
Right. So then it snowballed from there. I wrote a positive influence book about a gentleman that I grew up with. I was at a little convenience store as a young kid, 13, 14, wiping down gas pumps, picking up cigarette butts, returning bottles. I was the bottle boy. And he was the butcher next door. And just him and I became really good friends. So I wrote a book about the power of positive influence with him. I totally caught him off guard. And he's like, why me? I was like, listen, you don't have to be a famous individual in the world to have an impact on a young man or a young woman. Right. I said, it should be people like you, because I never met my hero, Arnold Schwarzenegger. All I wanted to be was Arnold Schwarzenegger. Right. I was going to be the next Pete Rose. Okay. My brother was going to be the next Eddie Van Halen, but we had never met them before. And I think it's our next door neighbors and our friends' parents that mentor us, and our baseball coaches. So it escalated from there. So it's been a positive influence on me. And then I wrote a book on 9/11. I interviewed people all across America about 9/11, because everybody remembers where they were on 9/11. Yeah. They can describe it, you guys, to a T, minute by minute by minute. Right. The loved ones that reached out to them, the next door neighbors that came over and checked, workers, co-workers, everybody. So I did that with Tunnel to Towers out of Long Island, New York, and I was able to raise some money for them. It's an amazing organization, Tunnel to Towers. And and matter of fact, it's just so special. So then I wrote another book, Amy and Jeff, and that's about the power of using the word yes versus using the word yeah in an interview. I had a young man work for me years ago, and he was hired by a Fortune 500 company because in his interview, he said yes the whole time, and they only can hire one. And they told him after he was hired 9 months later, we hired you because both of your credentials matched up. We could not throw either one out, but they hired him because he said yes during the interview instead of yeah. And those little things mean the world when you can't separate somebody. I mean, come on, it's pretty funny. So it's been a great journey. It really has. It all started because of reading, you guys. I read every day. I read this morning for almost an hour and a half. I'll read tomorrow morning for almost an hour, hour and a half. I just love it. I think it gives me an out. It gives me an outlet, gives me time and space. Yeah. My wife is an avid reader. She reads probably 3 to 4 books a week as well. And she's a go-getter. She has a lot of energy, nonstop. And this is kind of an outlet for her. And so together, her and I are the bookworms, I would have to say, right?
Yeah, that's incredible. That's incredible. From a guy who would never read a book, you would never read a book, right?
I hated reading. I was in the weight room, John. I had to bench press. I was bench pressing 405. I mean, I don't have time to read. Who has time to read?
Yeah.
But everybody does. Everybody has 15 minutes a day. If you read 15 minutes a day, that equates to 91 hours you will have read in 1 year. Just 15 minutes a day.
That's pretty, yeah.
So we can all come up. So Jump was number 7, and what a wonderful ride. It's just everything and more about creating Jump. It's just been unbelievable journey. Mm-hmm.
So talk about when you got the idea, the moment it hit you. It's in the book, but just talk about a little bit when it came to you that I'm going to write a book about my childhood, my first concert with my friends with Van Halen, and how it basically has stayed with you for your whole life, even to, I mean, there's a chapter in your book on leadership, and correct. I mean, and how this one night actually played into that, you know what I mean? So just elaborate on that a little bit.
Well, I mean, to give light to it, Andrew and Tanner and John, you guys all have 5 or 6 songs that when you hear it, you can pinpoint exactly where you were, who you were with, what you were doing. Yeah. That could have been down on the river drinking beers with your buddies. That could have been on the lake fishing, maybe with your dad. That could have been at a rock concert right there in New Zealand with your buddies. Maybe Bob Dylan made his way through and all your friends were there. And that's what Jump gave me and my friends. That was 40 years ago. And all of us can rattle off song after song after song. We as a nation and as a world love music. We love it. We're engrossed by it. But then when you start to narrow down individual songs or individual bands, that's when the umbrella starts to come down to a pinpoint. And Jump just happened to be hit right at the right age. I was almost 13 when Jump came out in December of 1983. MTV with Martha Quinn was just being welcomed in. We were in the largest neighborhood in the state of Ohio. We just got cable in almost half of the homes. So now we're watching MTV. We're all riding our bikes around. We're still at church. We're still having cookouts. We're still on the Little League baseball teams. But this one song, and it wasn't my mom and dad's song. It wasn't an Eric Clapton. It wasn't the Bee Gees. It wasn't the Kingston Trio. And I didn't have any older brothers. We talked about that all the time. I didn't have an older brother. I didn't have an older sister. So this was my welcoming into the music industry. Jump. I go from 12 to 13. Jump is played nonstop. I've heard it's been played sometimes like 15 to 20 times on MTV a day when it first came out. A gentleman here in Cincinnati said he was a DJ in Dayton, Ohio, and he had to play it on his 2-hour program 5 times in 2 hours. So that's how big of a hit this was. And that welcomed me into Van Halen. I wasn't playing my parents' Beatles albums anymore. I wasn't. And I was old enough to save money now that I could ride my bike up to Kmart. And I could buy albums, but I still hadn't bought any. But 1984 comes out. I believe it was January 7th of 1984. And my buddies and I...
Wasn't it Tuesday the 9th?
Tuesday the 9th. We all ran up there, and we didn't have the 45 then. We ran up and got the album. We had House of Pain on one side and Jump on the other, but now we wanted the album.
Right.
And that's the power that Jump had on all of my class in 7th grade. Even the guys and the girls that didn't go to the concert with us, Van Halen had a spark in 1984 because we weren't even in high school. We didn't even have driver's license yet. You couldn't buy cigarettes. Well, back then you probably could because nobody carded us anyways back then. Right. But, they just didn't. So Jump is a powerful song. It's very moving for me as an individual because it welcomed me to Van Halen. And then from that day on, I worked backwards with Van Halen. And then from that day on, I caught up with Van Halen and played everything forward. So when people say right time, right place, I was in the right time, in the right place in 1984. Yeah. My brother was 3 years younger or 2 years younger than me. He didn't understand it. He's just like, I like Eminence Front and Beach Boys.
Your brother was more of the sports guy, and your brother was more the music guy, right? The young
correct.
Correct. And so he thought they were probably a flash in the pan. He didn't, he knew the Rolling Stones, the Beatles, and all that. He's like, oh, who are these? These are new guys. You know what I mean?
Correct. And that's just how it was. My brother's age, he compared that to seeing The Firm. My brother was old enough at the age of 14 with my dad. He got to see The Firm. So when someone says radioactive to my brother, that's the equivalent to Jump to all my friends.
Wow.
Because his first concert was with Tony Franklin, Chris Slade, Jimmy Page, and Paul Rogers. Yeah. Well, that's his Jump because now he's no longer 12. Now he's 14. Right. And everybody has that moment in their life where rite of
passage, right?
Exactly. And Jump was it. And I'll tell you another funny story about Jump. And I think this resonates everybody that had cable back then, depending on how old your parents were. My mom fell in love with Van Halen, even more so because of MTV. She heard the song, and then, my mom smoked, my dad smoked, all my buddies' parents smoked, so that wasn't anything new. But when she would hear the song, and now she could see the band playing the song, my mom kind of fell in love a little bit with Eddie and David. I mean, it's just the way it was. Who are these guys dancing around, and they're all having fun. And you can feel the energy from the TV through, almost like Poltergeist, I think, from my angle, when I was a little kid. They're drawing me in. And I felt like saying, they're here,
Yeah, absolutely.
But when your parents fall in love with them, then that you're 100% got the correct backing. And my dad didn't care. My dad thought it was great. They were fun. But when you can hook your mom in, and your buddy's moms also fall in line, you're off to the races. You just are. And that's what Jump and Martha Quinn and MTV gave us. It's a gift. I think, at
Sure.
the right place at the right time.
Sure.
I was trying to explain to my son today. He's 28, and I was trying to explain to him, was like, you know, he's like, was Van Halen that big? I go, they were that, you could feel it. And like, it was like palpable. And like, I saw them for the first time in 1982. And it was at the Carrier Dome in Syracuse University. And it was just like, it was my first concert, like this was for you. And it was just, it was the loudest thing I had ever heard. It was just like the college kids throwing beer bottles. It was just great. 32,000 people. It was just, I was like, oh my gosh, these are the coolest guys on the planet. And that guy with the guitar is the coolest guy ever. And I was hooked from that point, but you could just feel it. And you knew that the next record was going to be they were just going to explode at that point. And listen, their first album was, they were just building it up, and they were, credible rock band, and people loved them as a rock band. But when they crossed into 1984, I always say they crossed into the public conscious, because your grandma knew who they were. I remember I mentioned it on the show once before. Somebody was saying they were in Cambodia in a little like canoe boat.
Right.
And Jump was on the radio there in Cambodia. It was just like, they were rock stars, but when you start to know the first names or the full names of every guy in the band, like the Beatles, then you're on rarefied air. And that's what happened with Van Halen. Everybody knew their names. And then they became like superheroes, like, action figures, superheroes on them, because that leopard jacket and those leather patch jeans that Eddie wore, and the bowling shoes, and Roth with his spandex. And, they were basically like action, superheroes at that point. And I was trying to explain that to my son. It was like, they were huge. They were the biggest rock band, I mean, in 1984. And every kid like us was just like, hooked on that, And I remember most kids start out at a younger age with, Kiss was the first band and the parents hated Kiss, and then you outgrew Kiss and went to Van Halen. And anybody here tonight obviously never outgrew Van Halen if you're watching this right now, because you're here 40 years later. But so your story is basically, one of the reviews says it the best on the back. It's basically like Stand By Me, the movie, and the Sandlot. It's basically that with Van Halen. And so you guys, the concert was coming. You knew it after that, and you guys wanted to go. And the book goes into much detail about this. We're just going to touch on different topics, but I told you I wanted to give a shout out to two guys, which were Mr. Myers, Jim Myers, and Skip Berger, who was so Jim Myers was the dad. Like, everybody has the neighborhood dad who will be the chaperone when you want to go somewhere. They're like, yeah, I'll go. And he was always the guy that was, I guess, up to going with you guys, right, for things like that. And so you guys wouldn't have won at all if it wasn't for him really there. And also the big shout out has to go to Skip Berger. That's Chris's dad, who was a police officer who was in charge of the paddy wagon, I guess, at Cincinnati Gardens.
Correct.
And I can understand. At first, I couldn't understand the apprehensions. I know, like, you guys came from strict backgrounds, like Catholic school, altar boy. I was the same way. But I mean, we got to realize that, like, 5 years earlier, in 1979, the Who played. Was it Riverfront Arena or something like that?
Yes, Riverfront Stadium.
It was a general admission, and 11 people were trampled to death at that show. So, if I was a parent back then and my 13-year-old kid wanted to go see Van Halen, I'd be like, no, you're not going, especially after that happened in Cincinnati. So that played into it also. But you can elaborate a little bit on Skip and Jim Myers, but so, and tell us about Skip, about what the moment that changed everything. Go ahead.
Sure. There's two things that are fun about this concert, and you guys will all relate to this. Mr. Myers was the chaperone, and he was the parent of 8 kids. So he had an older son, and then he had my age son, Mike, who was with us, and then he had a whole bunch of other kids behind him.
He just wanted to get out of the house. He just wanted to get out of the house.
You're right. So when you're stacked up with that much stuff, you are so used to saying yes.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. What's one more thing? What's one more kid? what's 10 more plates to set at the table? And the other thing is, Mr. Myers also served in the military. So he was in the Coast Guard during Vietnam and after that, and he got out as an E6. He said he was experienced so much stuff in those 6 years up and down the eastern coast of the United States that he's like, what's the Van Halen concert? That's no big deal. I'll take these kids. It's no big deal. So all the other parents, dads as well, had been in the military or were a police officer or were part of a big team. My dad played college baseball and played semi-pro baseball. So he knew shenanigans. They all knew this harassment, what do you want to say, coming of age moment. Whereas some of my other buddies' parents had never been a part of that. They were not firefighters. They weren't policemen. They weren't in a band. They had never played the guitar. They weren't on a sports team. So they were more reserved, like you guys mentioned, because of the Who concert allowing their kids to go. But Mr. Myers having a van, Equiline that you can seat probably 9 million Harlem Globetrotters in, said, you buy me a ticket and I'll take everybody. And he did.
Fair enough.
And that's the way it should be. And what's really cool about that is, if you talk to the guys from the book, Todd, Chris, Mike, and all the other guys in the back ends of their friends, because of those parents saying yes, they also said yes when their kids got that age. Sure, I'll let you go to a concert. Sure, no problem. I can go with you, but another parent's got to be with you. And then as they got 16 or 17, they let them go to concerts by themselves, depending on which one. Okay, let's make sure you tell your crowd that, the right one. And then Skip Berger was a detail police officer to earn extra money back in the 1980s. Police officers at the time were not paid very much. They could actually earn triple the amount of money per hour if they signed up for detail work. So Mr. Berger had worked the Led Zeppelin concert at the Riverfront Coliseum one time. He had a blast. His job working Led Zeppelin was just to sleep in the back with the guys to make sure none of their equipment was stolen. So
wow,
pretty
he
good.
got to sign up for events after events after events.
Wow.
So not even knowing we were going to the Van Halen concert, the Van Halen detail came up on the board once they announced Van Halen was coming to Cincinnati Gardens. And Skip said, absolutely, just sign me up. I will work. I will work the Thursday night, the March 8th, and I will work the Friday night, March 9th. Not a problem whatsoever.
Yeah, they were there 2 nights, right? Cincinnati Gardens.
2 nights. That is
8th
correct.
And
2 nights.
And ironically, but tell us that Skip would not let Chris go to the concert.
Right. So the tickets go on sale because the first tour kicked off on January 18th. So they probably went on sale probably right after 84 came out on the 9th or something like that. We're all altar boys. We're all on the Little League team, right? We're all friends and neighbors. We lived in the largest subdivision in the Ohio at the time, 1,100 homes. So we're all buddies. We all grew up with each other. But Chris's mom and dad would not let him go to the concert. It's only because Skip the cop knew, and I'll quote him, what goes on at concerts. And everybody out there's mind can start to go. Everybody can tell a little story of what they've seen and experienced. Right. And from a cop standpoint, you get to hear every single thing at the end of the shift of what transpired. So Skip said there's no way Chris is going to be able to go. So Mr. Myers said yes. And all of our friends, parents chipped in, bought him a ticket. And Skip then on Thursday night was out there, like you said, John, at the paddy wagon, taking care of all the shenanigans and all the hooligans. He's got to take them downtown and lock them up. About halfway through the concert, before it even began, I believe, Skip was pulled out from the paddy wagon. They pulled another police officer, and Skip is a big man, and he is very intimidating. He looks like Jack Reacher. I mean, he is going to kick your ass, okay? I still call him Mr. Berger. I still say yes, sir. Okay?
40 years later.
His hands are bigger than a bear paw, okay? So you don't screw around with this guy, all right? Because of his presence, he went backstage and was basically protecting Van Halen, all right? Well, with that, he started to engage with the band. Pretty soon, Eddie Van Halen and him are becoming pretty close. And let's just say a half an hour. And he starts asking him questions. What's it like to be a Cincinnati cop? And he's like, are you excited about tonight? Blah. And it just starts going back and forth, back and forth. And all the other policemen are sitting there telling him that they had never, ever, ever seen bands interact with one police officer in their life like Eddie Van Halen did with Skip Berger in a 30-minute session. It went over so well that Valerie Bertinelli was there that night. And Eddie came up to Skip and said, listen, Valerie needs to go to the concession stand. What she needed to go to the concession stand, nobody knows. But you got to remember, this is 1984. They didn't have the high-end catering in the back. They didn't have all their own protection and their own bodyguards.
Okay.
They depended highly on the cops to guard them. So Skip said, yes, I will take Valerie. So they venture off into the Cincinnati Gardens, and she probably gets, let's just say, some fries and a Diet Coke. Probably back then it was a tab, right? Back in 84. And all of a sudden somebody starts yelling, there's Valerie, there's Valerie. And Skip had to escort her and said, we got to get going back in a hurry. Get going back. And so he rushed her back there. And Eddie said, hey, I can't thank you enough, for helping her out. She was able to get maybe a couple souvenirs too at the stand and everything else. And Skip said to Eddie, well, that's my job. And Skip says, it's no big deal. That's what we're here for, to protect you and the band and your wife. And Eddie said to Skip, is your son here tonight? And Skip said, no, I'm sorry. He's not here. And then Eddie said to him, are you a fan of Van Halen? Do you know any songs? And Skip said, I know one song, and it's Jump, and it's really good. I like that song. But that's really all Skip knew. And Eddie asked him, is your son coming tomorrow night, Friday night? And Skip had to return back, no, I'm sorry, he's not coming here. He said, and Eddie stopped him and said, I want your son here tomorrow night. Right here. So he's pointing down at the backstage, and Skip basically, just said, okay, but nothing else happened. He still had to run that by his wife, Jan, Chris's mom. So he runs to a payphone back then, put in his quarter, and calls home, and him and Jan are going back and forth. And he said, listen, this guy is super nice. He's down to earth. He's very reliable. He's being very, how you want to say it, non-pop starish. He's a real genuine person taking an interest. And we got to bring Chris here tomorrow night. So finally, Jan, his wife, said, okay, Chris can go. So the next morning, all of us buddies, are at home. We're all excited to be going. Chris walks down to his breakfast table, and there's the Cincinnati Enquirer piece showing how well the Van Halen concert was from the night before. And Chris was like, gosh, Mom, why are you rubbing this in my face? I can't go to the concert. And then he looked around. She had a big smile, and she's like, your dad said you can go. And he's like, but I don't have a ticket. He said, your dad said he's taking care of everything. So there's nothing for you to worry about. And there wasn't. So when Mr. Myers made his round like the Uber and picked us all up, Chris hopped in the van, and we all drove over there to the Cincinnati Gardens. We hopped out of the van. We all went in the front, and there was Mr. Berger, Jack Reacher in his whole police gear, like Steven Seagal. Hey, Chris, come on back this way. And he opens up the back door to the backstage. Right. And him and Chris go in the backstage. And that's how Chris got in. Wow. Because it was sold out. Both nights were sold out very quickly. Everybody wanted to be a part of the Van Halen concert. That's why we're on here today. Everybody wanted to experience it. And for Cincinnati, you can get people from Dayton to come down really quick within an hour. You can get people within Louisville within an hour. Wow. Lexington within an hour and a half. Indianapolis about an hour and 15. Wow. And West Virginia within about an hour and 20 minutes.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, you can get a lot of states here very quickly. Wow. So when they were pre-planning this, I know that was set in motion.
That's why
only one night.
Yeah,
and then it turned into two because it sold out so fast.
Yeah. Wow.
So So we all got in there. We were in row number 10. We had $12.50 tickets. And Chris is backstage with all the groupies. Chris is only 12. And he describes it as drop dead gorgeous women from head to toe. And Skip's holding his hand because he said he held his hand because, it's dark in there. And the Cincinnati right. And the Cincinnati Gardens is damp and it's, it looks like an old museum or World War II place back in the back. And so Skip tells Chris, you stay right here. I'll be right back. And he goes in there to the backstage and tells Van Halen, hey, my son's outside. Eddie stands up and says, okay, guys, calm down for a second. We got a special guest coming in. And then Chris walks in there, and then Chris gets to meet every single guy, shakes all their hand. And he brought a 1984 cassette sleeve with him.
Yeah.
And they signed it all. And Skip Berger's eyes were as big as watermelon because the cops, all his cop friends said, Van Halen never signs anything. They don't interact with anybody. They will never sign anything. And here's Chris getting this signed. They give him the 1984 painter's cap with the guy with the hammer, with the guy with the hammer on the side. They give him like half a dozen guitar picks, and it was awesome. So they walk him out. And Chris is like, I got to meet up with my buddies. And there we are in row 10, and we all bought tour books. And Skip Berger said, give me all your tour books. And he took them from us. We never saw them again. We didn't know where they were. We just thought Skip was going to protect them in the back. That way beer wasn't sloshed.
Right.
Cigarette butts weren't thrown out on it or what have you.
Right.
And we were just welcomed right there into the concert. Row 10, there's nobody behind us. It was just unbelievable to experience your first concert with all your buddies, all of your teammates, all my friends that we would try to sip some wine behind the communion at the altar of the church. Let's taste and see what happens. All my buddies that always did
guilty.
Hey, John.
Guilty.
So here, it's just amazing to experience that. And it's still amazing to experience a first with your friends or your wife or your partner if you've never done it together. And that's what's so cool about this. Right. And that's why this story, I think, resonates with so many people out there. They had never, ever seen a Van Halen in concert. The song is doing very well. The group is booming on MTV. They are booming on MTV.
As you pointed out to us earlier, that 40 years ago today, Jump hit number one on the top 40 charts.
That's correct.
That was 40 years. And then you said that what show, where they were playing in Atlanta, you said tonight, right?
Correct. They were playing in Atlanta for 2 nights 40 years ago. So when they stopped playing in Atlanta, which would be tonight, Jump would go to number 1. And then next week they went to Pittsburgh. So the city of Pittsburgh got to welcome Van Halen in with the number 1 song in the world.
Right. That's incredible.
So you can kind of thank Atlanta maybe for pushing them over because they're requesting for a major city. Boom! I'm sure they got so many requests over. Play it again, play it again, play it again. And like you said, John, press play on that boom box. Play, record. Whatever you had to do. And then they slid right in there to Three Rivers, and Pittsburgh welcomed them with open arms to another sellout crowd, and it just took off. All of them were sold out. Every single one, even starting back on January 18th in Jacksonville, Florida. That was sold out. Everywhere they went, it was sold out. The publisher of my book, there's an ad in there. The publisher of my book saw Van Halen, and he didn't even realize it until after I contacted him. He saw Van Halen in 1984 at Zeppelinfeld in Germany.
Wow.
And I said, you got to put it in the book. I said, that even makes it better. So
a
shout out to one of our Army vets. He was stationed in the Army over in Germany, and he got to catch Van Halen right before the tour was done. It's just amazing when you talk to everybody about the experience of how they experienced Van Halen. It's just a fond memory that everybody wants to never ever wrap up and throw away. You want to keep it open.
And books like this do that. And books like that's why I highly recommend it. It's a great read. You will not put this book down. You'll read it from start to finish. You know, you won't even, and it'll go by so quick, and it'll bring you back to that time if you lived during that time. And if you didn't live during that time, it'll just give you a little taste of what it was like and it'll bring you back your memories of your first concert. You're talking there about how you didn't even know there was going to be a warm-up band in there, you know, it's just like, and you didn't know it. Is that Van Halen coming out? It's like, you don't even know, you know, it's autographed, but it's funny because you're like, wow, we got to see another band for free. You know?
Right. So. I mean, it's just the way it is. It's the music industry. It's like anything else. If you guys are all music fans from start to finish, and then you got that one fan that knows music so well inside and out that when the music category comes up on Jeopardy, you know instantly they're going for the $1,000 question. They know that. But then they've never witnessed something else or experienced something else for the first time. And people get one shot. You get one shot to enjoy something for the first time.
That's it.
Exactly. And if it is terrible, you're never going to want to go back.
Right.
I mean, I have explained to people over and over. Can you imagine if David Lee Roth that night back in 1984 came out with a bar stool, and then Eddie Van Halen came out with a bar stool, and Michael Anthony came out with a bar stool, and then Alex in the back just had a mediocre drum set, and they just sat there, and they basically sang their songs. They weren't running around. They weren't engaging with anybody. They weren't talking to anybody. I never would have bought into them. Right. I would have said, what is this? I am not entertained at all. But the minute that curtain went down back in 1984, and Eddie Van Halen came screaming out, and David jumps off the drum set, and they go right into Unchained, man, I mean, it was so fast, so engaging, so loud, that it was so much fun, and all of us loved it from start to finish. Yeah. If they would have sat there, I mean, we never would have dumped any more money into it. Kmart would have closed years earlier, you know? It's just true.
And it obviously it had a lasting impression. You guys are still great friends to this day, 40 years later, and you still talk about this, you know, that show. It's like there's certain moments in everybody's life that they, you know, that they'll always remember, and they vividly remember, you know, certain things like that. And this was at, you know, everybody's first concert. Look, my first concert was Van Halen too, just 2 years earlier. But I still remember, you know, I vividly remember, you know, the songs, the set list and things like that they played.
Right.
And I just remember just being like, my senses were assaulted. Like like you said there, between the lights and the sound and just the arena full of people. It was like, I mean, I was majorly hooked at that point. And obviously still to this day, we're still talking about them. And, but a lot of, what I loved about your book was that, you know, specifically the part where, Skip Berger, you know, basically changed his mind about letting his son go to the show by talking to Eddie and seeing how great of a guy Eddie was. You know, he was just a normal, anybody that, you know, most people have great experiences with him. You rarely hear people have had bad experience meeting Eddie Van Halen. He was just a nice guy, down to earth guy. And on that particular tour, I mean, we mentioned it earlier. I heard a few stories. The DJ from Sirius Radio, Keith Roth, I think him and a few of his buddies snuck into the hotel in Manhattan when they played the Garden, and I think it was March 30th and 31st of 1984, and they knocked on his door for his hotel room, and Eddie opened the door, and they were there, and apparently he gave them all beers and stuff like that. They're like 17 years old, giving them beers, and then there was another guy I saw on the internet where the kids knocked on his hotel room door. They got in there, and Eddie let them in, and they wanted to get a picture with his guitar, so he put the Kramer 5150 over their neck, and he told the kid that, hey, you need the cigarette to make it look authentic. So there's a picture of Eddie putting the cigarette in the kid's mouth so they can take a picture of him with his guitar before he sent them on their way out of his hotel room. You know what I mean? To get out of your kids, you know. But you know, these are the things we need for people to, you know, to know about the late great Eddie Van Halen. He was just a nice guy.
You're absolutely right, John. Go ahead.
John
I'm
and
sorry,
Jim, can I just jump in, guys?
Sure.
Just as one of the co-hosts here, just give me 2 seconds. This place is a cool place. We really appreciate everybody jumping on board and hanging out with us and offering opinions and comments and a little bit of ball breaking. I get that, guys, but just be cool with some of the comments here. That's all I ask. Yeah, and just be cool. Thank you, guys.
Anyway, where were we?
Sorry, John.
Yeah, no, we were just talking about that Eddie was a nice guy, and that now he's gone, but you want his legacy to be one of his music, and just that he was a nice guy, a good guy, and that the only way that people are going to know that is by books and stories like this about him. And I still don't think he gets the respect as a musician and that he deserves. I really don't. I know everybody know, Eddie Van Halen, the great, but people seem to forget about that, and they need to be reminded that he was a special musician, and he was obviously a special guy, and anybody that met him or spent a few minutes with him, they pretty much will tell you the same thing. And this is just
Johnny
story reinforces it.
I think those books are going to come by the music academics, by the professors, because we've seen those books over the last 10, 15 years. For example, with the Beatles, we've seen a lot of musicologists, Jim, write about the music, who are trained musicians and analysing the music. And I can't wait to read those books when they come along. But I think what's really important about what we do here and what your book is, Jim, and I've ordered a copy, I can't wait to read it, but from just talking to Jim and reading a couple of other reviews, it's the organic fans, your experiences that are going to enlighten the academic books when they're going to be written, because I think they need to understand, these academics that are going to be isolated in their studios, John and Tanner, I think they have to have an appreciation of how this music moved people, and that's going to be balanced by these books. Does that make any sense?
Absolutely it does. Absolutely it does. Because this book is not written by an expert on music. I am no means an expert on music. I'm really not. What I am is I am a customer service fan. I love customer service. And Van Halen gave me that. So this is a 236-page thank you card to the band Van Halen from 7 guys at a concert, thanking them for what they did for us. There are far more experts, like you talked about, Andrew, that are better noted than I am. But I captured this because it's what they gave me. And if you run that across the board 20, 30, 50, 60 times, whether it's 5150, OU812 tour, fair warning, what have you, there are so many of us out there, and millions, that have excellent stories of what Van Halen gave them. It wasn't just the music. It was the fan club. I mean, I had the fan club. Everybody had the fan club. That was my first mail-in order form to get a T-shirt, and then the T-shirt came back. I mean, that is awesome. And those are the memories that my buddies and I, and you guys too, have of Van Halen. Then that's what needs to be expressed all the time. It's not just that Alex was one hell of a drummer. He was. But he was more than that. He blew me away by setting the gong on fire. He blew me away when he ran down there. I mean, literally, those little things to me as a kid is what got me to buy the next album. Got my buddies to go see him. One, Todd Zimmerman saw him 17 times. 17 times. And Sammy and Mike are coming to Cincinnati. Chris Berger and I just went to see Mammoth up in Columbus, Ohio. Mammoth is going to be here. Mammoth is going to be here next Friday. And Mammoth is going to be here this summer touring at where the Cincinnati Reds Park is with the Foo Fighters. They're going to open up for them. Yeah. So this is a fortunate thing that happened to 7 young kids, or 5 young kids and 2 adults. Because Skip Berger, there's pictures in the book of Eddie Van Halen holding up a sniper rifle with all the policemen. Those are all, that's Skip Berger's friends. And Eddie Van Halen wanted to do that to have fun with the guys.
Or picture with his hands behind his back like he's being cuffed and all the cops there.
Right.
Eddie.
Right.
Yeah,
those are fun. I mean, they're not that serious. When they got on stage, they were 100% committed to me. To me, they gave me everything that I wanted that night. The autographs in this book are all byproducts of them blowing me away. And all my stacks of albums and all my buddies' stacks of albums that they have bought and CDs that they have bought at years, that's because Van Halen, that one night, we only have one night, gave us everything we ever wanted. And from a business angle, Van Halen ranks #1 with customer service. As a matter of fact, today, my wife and I went to a play here in Cincinnati. We left at intermission. It was so boring. There was no stage presence. It wasn't exciting. It was boring. Van Halen was not. They were the exact opposite. They were over the top. Every time you see them, over the top.
Yeah. And
that's it. I have walked out on numerous music venues in my life. I compare everything, and my wife laughs. Everything that I compare to and experience-wise goes back to Van Halen in 1984. Every single place.
That one night in 1984 that basically it stayed with you, your life. I mean, your profession, your job, the leadership chapter in the book about how it related to that. And I mean, it's a great book. I highly encourage people to pick up the book and read it. There's a lot more in here, a lot more stories. Like I said, it's about Van Halen, but it's also about a group of kids in the 80s, growing up in the 80s. And like I said, if you weren't alive at that time, like Tanner, you can read it. You get a little bit of a feeling what it was like, or like my son, when I was telling him, it's like, how big were they? I go, well, they were huge. They were like the biggest band, in America in 1984. It was like everywhere you turn on the TV, you turn on the TV, like, you see Taylor Swift on the TV. It's like, we were like clamoring anytime they would be anything on TV where they'd mention them or an interview. And it's like, we would have the VCR going to record, whatever show, Entertainment Tonight or whatever they were going to be on, interviewed on or whatever. And it was just a different time because, back then we didn't have, it wasn't like the drive-through society we live in now, where you want something now, Amazon, you got it an hour later. It's just like, we didn't, we've talked about this before. It's like, a lot of people, I remember somebody saying the first time they ever heard Eddie Van Halen talk, they couldn't believe his voice. It was like, wow, I never heard him speak before, because back then it wasn't like, or as readily available by going on the internet as things are now. And in some ways that was a lot better, because it just, the excitement level was even more, because it was like, wow, you waited so long for that concert or whatever. And then you went to see it and it was just like the greatest thing ever. Or you waited so long for that album. And that's lost nowadays. And just everything's lost nowadays. The fact that you had to go to Kmart or Record World to go buy a record, and you saved your money or whatever, and you went there, and you used to, and just the smell of the vinyl and the smell of the sleeve. I used to love the smell of the I'm weird, but it still sticks in your head, like, you know what I mean? And
when you bought it and you listened to it, and you might have got through the end of it and said, this is horrible, or or the opposite. Like now, I mean, I'm of the younger generation, so now it's just, if a new album comes out, it's immediately on Spotify. I go listen to it. I pay monthly for the Spotify thing, but I have no stock in buying an album that was either amazing or bad or whatever. And I don't have to say, oh man, I wish I didn't buy this, or I wish, there's no surprise, because I can skip through it. I go right to the middle of the album and go, what does this song sound like? I like the name of this song or whatever. And
right.
And and like you said, something I laughed at was when you said your son asked you like about Van Halen and stuff, and I've definitely asked those same questions to people older than me, and kind of going back to earlier in the stream, I knew that Van Halen was big when I heard women that were, you know, of that time saying I had posters of Eddie Van Halen in my bedroom and stuff like that. And that's what, like, that was something I never heard about any guitarist that I've idolized, you know, Angus Young and any of those guys. I mean, I've known some older women that definitely had crushes on Hendrix and stuff like that, and Santana and stuff. But you know, like to hear that people, you know, even my mom had pictures of David Lee Roth and stuff like that. Like that's when you know, and you said that's when you know, like when people when they've, you know, eclipsed that kind of like unknown level. And my mom was young enough to kind of go through that, but also go through like the blow up, like in like 91 when Metallica kind of blew up. And like, you know, when she tells me stories about turning MTV on and dancing, her and her girlfriends dancing to Enter Sandman on the TV, like it's like, try to like, make that make sense. It's really funny to me, and I think similar to that kind of happened with Metallica. Like, you know, not to be sexist, but women started listening to Metallica in '91, and in 1984, women started listening to Van Halen.
Right. Mm-hmm. You're right.
It was just back then. It was just, I just think, you know, you had to work a little harder at. You know, I was 15 when 1984 came out. I remember Tuesday, January 9th, my sister had to take me to the Record World, and they were just unboxing them in the afternoon. It was like 3:00 in the afternoon, and they were opening the case. They probably opened a case earlier in the day and they were gone, but they were opening another case, and they had the big display in the front of the store. I still have the giant poster. I got it from Record World. It says, it's got the baby on the album cover, and then and just Blue Sky continues after it. It says Van Halen is watching you, and it was just like a big giant like 40-inch poster that it was part of the display in the store. And it's torn up a little bit, but I still have it. I saved it, but you know, reading the liner notes on the records, just, you know, it was just, I remember, you know, dropping the needle on Panama the first time and just like, whoa, I was like, this song is going to be huge, you know, and sure enough, it was just back then it was just a lot different than it is now. Now it's just like everything comes
physical media. Physical media is a dying art, and we all know it. And I actually got in a little argument on Facebook about it a couple of weeks ago, because someone was saying, like, you know, vinyl is selling like crazy right now, but, you know, I'm of the generation that is buying vinyl, and I do listen to it, not, you know, as a primary source of you know, listening, because it's so easy to just look on Spotify and listen to the 1984, but I don't think people are listening to them, because, you know, it's expensive to buy good record players now. I have one of those little suitcase ones, and it sounds like dog doo-doo, but you know, unfortunately it's the records have become kind of a you know, just a collector's item, or like, you know, throw it on maybe to impress some, like, you know, I've definitely thrown one on to impress a girl to make it seem like that's what I primarily listen to music with. But you know,
I tell you what, Tanner, my wife and I went out to this dive restaurant in Cincinnati. It's packed all the time, but it's a dive barbecue restaurant. And they have this tiny little record player with one speaker. So you only can hear the right side of the album. The left side is totally gone. And the album, they have a whole sleeve of albums you can go through, and you can pick one out and put it on there. We went out and had barbecue, and there was Van Halen 1. And I walked up to the woman. I said, do you mind if I put that on? She said, well, I'll put it on for you, honey. And she came around. My wife and I were right there. And I listened to Van Halen 1 on a record player with one speaker. Okay?
We know where this is going. Go ahead, Jim. We know where this is going.
And it was unbelievable, man. Unbelievable. And everybody in there was like, everybody was. It was awesome.
I thought I knew where it was going. I thought you were going to say that the one speaker you got was the one speaker without the guitar. It was just
no, we had the speaker with the guitar. We did.
You got lucky. You got the right
lucky.
Speaker.
Yes. But
great.
Everybody in there, Tanner, they didn't care if it was brand new. This was something my dad would have used. That was big back in his day. Probably cost $10 at the local flea market. But everybody in that little dive barbecue was tapping their toes. You saw their fingers going, bam, you know, air guitar like crazy. You know, 60-year-old guy, 45-year-old woman. You know, it didn't matter. They're all like, but there was that one kid in there who was like, what is this stuff? You know, he's like, well, what's going on here? But I don't think that necessarily it's just a perfect record player. To hear it on the record, it just, in my brain, it just, I'm older than you. It just puts me right back there when I bought that record, like John said, up there at Kmart. I mean, I can still remember riding the bike through the woods, and you had all your money from your chores. And it probably was the worst record player in the world. But to me, it was the best. And I'm proud of you, Tanner. That's great. You put it on there for the ladies. That's awesome, buddy. Good thinking, right? Light a little candle. Light a candle too, right?
Nice, Tanner.
My mom, my mom bought me a couple of Van Halen records a couple years ago for Christmas, and I actually, because I listened to it so much, I put it on, and that's when I learned that my record player, which surprisingly being brand new, wasn't at the right speed, because like it just from the fact, and it wasn't like ridiculously fast, but just because I've listened to it so much, I said this is fast, so I took out my guitar, I tuned it correctly. I opened it up, and there's a little. I looked it up, and there's like, there's a little trim pot, a potentiometer inside that you can mess with. So I moved it until it was exactly in tune. So now all my records are in tune again. But that was pretty funny. It's funny. I definitely, awesome. I'm of the younger generation, but I did find a lot of music kind of naturally in a very kind of old-fashioned way, just because my parents kind of ingrained that in me. I didn't have internet until, I was a lot older than my friends, and I didn't have social media until I was a lot older than my friends. So a lot of the music I found was from friends, family, and stuff like that. I mean, I got a lot of, I resonated with, listening. I grew up like on the Beatles and stuff. That was my thing. And so much so that when I grew up, I remember I had one grandmother that listened to modern music, early 2000s for me. Modern music, was Britney Spears and Justin Timberlake and stuff. And I remember she was the only person I even knew that listened to that music. So when I was with her in the car, she'd play that. And I remember thinking that was old people music. And because the music I listened to was Beatles and AC/DC and all that. And I remember going, oh, that music is horrible. I hate old people music, because the music I was listening to was not.
Right. Perfect. I tell you what's so funny though is back in the 80s, Tanner, there was a thing called Columbia House. Okay, have you ever talked to your parents about Columbia House?
No.
It's the funniest thing in the world. It was all the honor program, and you would get 10 cassettes, I think, for a penny each, and then you had to buy 2 cassettes at full price in 1 year. So all your buddies would sign up for Columbia House, and then nobody would ever pay the full price. Like they would send you these letters in the mail that you better pay full price now. And my buddies would change their names. They would keep mailing them in, and they would get 50 to 100 cassettes within like 3 weeks. And they never bought a single album or cassette at full price. And John, you remember that, don't you?
Yeah, I'm surprised Columbia House lasted as long as it did. It was around for a long time. I was like, how can they make any money? Everybody doing the same thing, No,
I know. But man, I tell you what, it brought in a lot of new stuff for people that couldn't afford to do it. And I thank them for that.
It's true.
But at the same time, I feel bad for them because it wasn't very lucrative on the back end. I mean, it just wasn't. And I applaud everybody out there that did pay full price twice a year.
Yeah.
But I just think it's funny is, you talk about cassettes and you talk about LPs and the CDs and everything. And now we're coming back full circle again to LPs, and everybody's buying them. I was at a record store for a book signing 2 weeks ago with all the guys, and people were walking out with full-size LPs. Granted, they were used albums. They were used, but they were getting $19.99 for Women and Children First. They got $19.99 for Diver Down. And I remember you could go up to Kmart or Gold Circle or Everybody's Records and you could buy an album for $4.99, $3.99, something like that. And so I think it's great that people are playing LPs again. I think it really is. I think it's pretty neat. The sound, the little bump, maybe a little skip to it.
Yeah.
It
Crackle,
just feels better.
Crackle.
You know? Right.
It's an experience. It's an experience. I was given a bunch of records from, actually, I kind of stole them from my ex-girlfriend's mom, but she had, I could tell which ones her and her sisters listened to the most because of obvious reasons. But I remember, I think it was Queen, A Night at the Opera. That one was just obliterated, and that's one of my favorite albums. And I just remember being like, I can't even listen to this because the divots were so small, so big that it would jump to the next track, much less a couple seconds, and I'd go, oh my Lord. But it's part of the experience, I think, and I think it's not it's not about sound quality, because it doesn't have to be. I think the music recorded,
it doesn't have to be perfect. You're right.
The music recorded for LPs and vinyls the music spoke for itself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it definitely did.
And Van Halen spoke for itself. I mean, even though they had one of the greatest like stage presences, they you could have watched it with your eyes closed and seen it with your eyes closed, and it would have been just as good.
Yeah, the one thing we all regret is that there was no concert film from 1984. That would have been,
Yeah.
Although Jim, I don't know if you've seen recently the Donington film
off the angle, off to the stage.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah,
Awesome.
It's amazing, right?
I was wondering what you thought about that, because being that it kind of came out of nowhere, I was wondering if it brought you back at all. And John, you too. I'd love to.
It definitely brought you back. You remember little things and stuff like this. Like, oh yeah, I kind of remember that. You know what I mean? Remember those dirty sneakers that Eddie was wearing? Those dirty white sneakers. You know what I mean? Stuff like that. But,
I'll tell you a funny story. Is when the concert was over with back in 1984. Let's just say it was midnight and we all went home. So we had all day Saturday and all day Sunday. And my brother, 2 years younger, played guitar, and he was pretty damn good. He played a Fender Stratocaster, which seems to be always the first guitar most kids are given back in the day. And I came home from school on Monday, and I was on cloud 9, Tanner and Andrew. I had my tour book signed by Van Halen. Okay. Yeah. And back in the day, back then, you ate as a family. Okay. So we actually had to wait till like 7 o'clock for Dad to get home. And I told Mom and Dad and my brother, I've got Van Halen's autographs. Check these out. My mom said, that's awesome. My dad said it was awesome. My brother said, those are worthless. Those are worthless. Van Halen will never make it. And I can still quote him to this day that he said, there's no way they're ever going to make it. No way. It's all hogwash. These guys are nothing like Pete Townsend and Keith Moon. They're nothing like Eric Clapton and Jeff Beck and everything else. Well, I tell you what, when I was a senior in high school in 1989, my brother ate crow. He was buying Van Halen albums for every single one, 5150, Balance. He was buying them in droves because he became of age to understand the greatness behind them. He was too young to understand what they offered. And he was running off the coattails of my parents and my parents' friends because of the Beatles, Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin. All of them are awesome, don't get me wrong. Sure. And then my brother got to see firsthand, hey, this Van Halen, they're special. They're awesome. And this Eddie Van Halen guy, he is over the top unbelievable. And I remember my brother buying all the stuff, the music books, the tapping for the feet. I mean, my brother was hooked in. I mean, he was trying to mimic. And I think that he was so good, he actually headlined at the age of 18, my brother did, at the place that Wolfgang's going to open up next week at. My brother never went back, but he wasn't invited back. Let's just put it that way. But still, Van Halen had an impact on him. And they had one on me emotionally, as friends, and as the music. But as far as my brother being a guitar player, I mean, it put him on the right path. It was almost like he was fighting the upper, like, no, there's no way, no way. They didn't come from England. They're not part of the original tree. They're not part of the roots. Right. When in reality they were. He just was too young to understand that.
Has he ever said to you, Jim, you were right? You were right.
No,
Jim.
we haven't talked since that day, you guys. Okay? No, all kidding aside, my brother has seen Van Halen numerous times back long before he had 4 girls and was married and all that stuff, and life got in the way. But, you know, he appreciates them, not as much as I do, because that was my concert.
Right.
His concert was the Firm. His first concert was seeing Tony Franklin,
Jimmy
Page, Paul Rogers, Chris Slade. That was his concert. So it was perfect for him, because the Honey Drippers, and it was just right around that same age, 1984, Van Halen, Sea of Love, Radioactive, you know. So it was perfect, and that was his.
Yeah, I saw them that year too. I remember seeing the Firm that year.
Did you really? Yeah.
It was like 1985, I think it was, right?
Probably was, right after Van Halen broke up a little bit, right after the Monsters of Rock tour over in England at Zeppelin Field in Germany. Excuse me. But yes, you are correct. So everybody has that. Tanner, what was your first concert, buddy? Turner.
Small time concert. My grandfather took me to actually, they're pretty popular. I think they're probably the most popular tribute, the Beatles Fab Four tribute band. They came pretty close, and we saw them, and we got front row seats in this kind of small music hall in the area, and that was pretty cool, being a huge Beatles fan. And then to kind of wrap up the full circle of that, we saw Paul McCartney at Fenway in Boston a couple years later. So that was kind of like a full circle moment. But first concert that really spoke, like, you know, was pretty awesome to me was seeing ZZ Top. Even at their old age, I love it. And I heard a lot of people say at that time, you know, they don't move around that much, and they never really did.
They never did.
I never really care. I'm a massive, and that concert, you know, got me to listen to them more. And now and so when I saw them again, I knew a lot more songs. I knew every song that they were going to play. And the second time I saw them, Cheap Trick opened for them, and that was the loudest thing I've ever heard, still to this day. Really? I don't think Cheap Trick wanted to be followed up by anyone. And oh my Lord, I spent most of the concert with like my fingers kind of on my ears, sort of at least directing the sound away from them a little bit. And I remember looking around at the mean age there was probably 55, and I remember no one else had any earplugs in at all. And I said, man, I wish I was old right now and had no hearing, because this would be a lot more enjoyable.
Like me, old like me. Tanner, was Dusty Hill still alive when you saw them? Or was
both times. Yeah.
Oh, good. All right. At least you got.
I was actually like in the kind of, I started looking for tickets right around the time he did die, unfortunately, and because I would have seen them every year until they stopped, because it was just such a good show for me, and I'm just a massive, you know, ZZ Top, Billy Gibbons, everyone in the band are all kind of idols of mine, and I've heard a lot of people in the area say they saw them and go, you know, they were boring, they didn't move around at all, and I'm like, what do you expect, and two, that's not who ZZ Top is. So whatever.
Maybe the saddest thing about now for people now is that, you know, they that never got to see Van Halen and never will, is that there's really no good concert footage. You know, you wish there were, you know, you have Live Without a Net, but that was Sammy Hagar. There's the original Van Halen, you know, and I love all Van Halen, like we all said. I love the Sammy Hagar era. I love it all. Anything with Eddie Van Halen in, I love it. Doesn't matter. But that original Van Halen, they were the most special version of Van Halen. They just were. They were just unique. And, you know, they wouldn't have made it without David Lee Roth, and they wouldn't have made it without Eddie. You know what I mean? They needed each other, and you know, and maybe the fact that they didn't get along made for great music. A lot of bands, people don't get along and they make great albums. And you know what? And in that period of time they were together, you know, from 1974 to 1985, really, they were like a comet and they accomplished a lot. And it's just sad that we don't have anything to look back, like a good quality, you know, concert video like Led Zeppelin has. And we have nothing like that, you know, with in 1984, obviously at the end, it would have been a great video of that tour. You know what I mean? Because you would have had a sprinkling from every album on that tour or something. You know? A nice snapshot of that era, of that time. And it's just crazy because they made no money on that tour. They broke even. They said they broke even because what did they have, like 15 semi tractor trailers? That was the biggest stage they ever
the
took.
Biggest one.
Road. Yeah. So that would have been the one hey, let's film this one. You know what I mean? So let's save this one on there. And for David Lee Roth, for all, you know, how he was connected with making the videos for the songs and he was all involved in that. You think he would have said, hey, we have to commit this to tape or film so that we have this for the rest of our lives. And we have nothing, which is a travesty in my opinion. It's just terrible, you know? So
I think somebody has it out there. It is under lock and key, and it'll drop right when we think, we've searched far and wide. We've gone to the depths. We've gone all the way to the moon and back. And all of a sudden, someone's just going to turn that key, pop that little box open like a time capsule, and they're going to say, okay, here we go. And hopefully they will cash in on that and make some money off of that, well-deservedly so, pay it back in the rears, and somebody's going to buy that. Somebody had to have videotaped it.
Yeah,
maybe Alex might drop something when he drops his new book, and it might be.
You're right.
Part of me thinks that they just. I think if it's going to get released, or, you know, it's not going to be official. I mean, just the Donington footage was proof of that. I think it's not going to be official. I think maybe, you know, maybe one day we'll see more footage from the Oakland 81 show. Being that they were there for 3 days straight, and I assume they recorded a lot more than what we saw, being that it was kind of a jumbled together kind of, you know, for the sake of kind of music video purposes. But I don't understand. I was just listening to actually when Balance was dropped, they did a kind of like a album drop kind of party over in England or something like that, and they were getting interviewed by someone. It was just the audio and tension. I didn't think tensions were high at that point, but listening to the interview, tensions are extremely high between you know, Alex and Eddie on one side and Sammy and Michael on the other. And just the, you know, Eddie says it, and I wish I had like a direct quote what he said, because Michael makes a joke like, if you want to get through Sammy, you got to go, you know, you got to talk to me first. And Eddie said, they're businessmen, we're the musicians or whatever. And you could kind of, I couldn't see any facial expressions, but it's, you know, you kind of tell that was kind of like a jab. And I think that's just how it was. I think they were convinced early on that they didn't need to make, you know, videos and movies and stuff like that. And I think the fact that they, you know, Sammy's management probably convinced them to do some, you know, obviously Live Without a Net, and then continually kind of smaller, you know, small Right Here, Right Now, and stuff like that. But like, Eddie and Alex don't give a shit about movies and honestly making money.
Well, Alex used to always say, what would Led Zeppelin do? Led Zeppelin wouldn't do this. We're not going to do this. We're not. But the truth is, Alex, Led Zeppelin did do all that. And there's a lot of great footage of Led Zeppelin out there. And there's zero of Van Halen. And, you know, as far as we know, 1984 never comes up as any, that it was pro shot. There were, you know, one show, you know, like we know about Fair Warning and stuff like that. There was some pro shot stuff then. And Greg Ranoff, I think, recently said in 1988 there was they had a mobile truck outside, and Don Landy recorded a show in '88. But that's the Hagar era. But there's no evidence that I know of that there was any pro shot in 1984, which was their biggest stage, the biggest lighting, biggest sound. You know, and it's how could this be possible? You know what I mean?
I agree.
David Lee Roth, who was such a visual video guy that, you know, who loved to see himself in front of the camera, that that there's nothing out there pro shot. It's crazy. So basically, we only have to go back to our own memories of 1984. That's
Correct.
That's what we have,
Yeah, and that's the great part about it all. It's a memory that nobody can take away from us. It's in there. Right. Just like, maybe when I'm 90 years old, I won't remember it.
Right.
But, that's okay. I will have passed that story down numerous times. Yeah. And you, as well as others, and as well as like this summer coming up with Sammy and Michael, and at the same time Wolfgang's playing. And Andrew, like you said, Alex is releasing a book back in October of this year. And this book, Jump, comes out this year. You're hearing all different versions. And I hope people go out there, maybe that aren't even familiar with Wolfgang, or they fight the cause, blah, 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 whatever you hear. I hope they just go out there and they listen to him at a small venue, because he's going to explode very quickly. He's going to go right up the tier. And he's not going to be playing the small venues I saw him with 1,400 people at a church that turned it into a music 3-tier venue in Columbus, Ohio. He's going to be beyond that very quickly, especially this summer, I think, with where he's touring. He's going all across the pond. I mean, he's going to explode when he comes back around. He's working on his 3rd album as we speak. That is The Rumor Mill. So he's going to take off. And I hope people this summer, like starting right now when he's on tour, buy those tickets. Go see him. Because when 5 years comes from the day, or 10 years, you can say, I was there. I experienced it. I knew what it was like, instead of being wear with binoculars, and you got to bring your opera glasses with you because you got to sit so far back. Right. You can't afford $20,000 seats anymore,
Yeah.
So I always tell people that, go out there and see him right now. Sammy's coming to Riverbend with Michael. Go see him. I mean, there's lawn tickets still on sale. The good seats inside are sold out. But when you go to a concert, nobody asks you, where exactly did you sit? My friends and I don't say that. We do with this Van Halen one, because that's pretty awesome. Row number 10 for $12.50. You can't beat that today. But most of the time when you go see them at a venue inside of a stadium, no one's going to say how high or whatever. They're going to say, I was there. Got to see them fly around. I got to see the Jack Daniels bass going. Bum, 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 bum. I got to feel the building erupt. I got to see Eddie on the wire. I got to see the gong. I got to see the samurai sword from David. No one inside Cincinnati Gardens would really say, where were you sitting? They all say, I was there. Yeah. I was a part of that.
Right.
And that's what's cool. Like the Hollywood Bowl, I was a part of that. You can say that. I wasn't, but go see him there.
I still want to know how you guys got 10th row. I mean, that was like, it must have been destiny or fate or something.
I mean, somebody's mom had to be really fast. My mom was a cheerleader in high school. She maybe weighed 110 pounds. She would have been 1984. She would have been 35, maybe 30, something like that. So she would have been fast enough to run through. But there's no way in hell any of us would have skipped good Catholic grade school to tell mom and dad we're going down to Ticketron at the mall. And I can tell you this much. None of my parents would have spent the night in a tent on the sidewalk outside of Ticketron to wait for Van Halen's tickets.
No, exactly.
There's no way. There's no way. So some mom had to have gotten there early, but that's the missing piece. It's a missing puzzle to put this all together. So the book is complete, but nobody remembers that story, Andrew. Nobody can. Nobody will say it's my mom. My dad at the time, there's no way he could have ran that far. He would have been trampled on by teenagers. I can tell you that much. But somewhere, somehow, the gods of musicians were looking down on us, and bingo, you guys can get it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Jim, I had a question. Going back to kind of like eras of Van Halen, I always find that a lot of people tend to cling to eras of bands that they kind of were introduced on. And I wondered if you said that you kind of were introduced to the 1984 era, and you said you kind of caught up before, caught up after. I was wondering if you found an era that kind of resonated more with you, and you went to that, you went to that instead, or did you like it all together, or are you just stuck on 84, like as you
Well,
should
what a
be?
great question. That's an awesome, awesome question. I am a huge sports fan. As a matter of fact, I work for the Cincinnati Reds. I am an usher, so if you ever need help getting down to your seat, I'll be more than happy to take you. Okay. It's the same thing about baseball. It's the same thing about football. Are you a 1980 Dolphins fan only, or are you always a Dolphins fan? In 1984, I was only a Van Halen fan. That's the only album I understood was 1984. But because of going to that concert firsthand, once the concert got out and weeks passed by and I cut a couple more yards or washed my parents' car, I was able then to go up to the store and buy Women and Children First. And then I was able to buy Fair Warning. So I was working my way backwards. Maybe I bought Van Halen 1. Well, I only heard that stuff through a buddy of mine's brothers, nephews, older brothers, uncle, that maybe played it every once in a while. They were not playing Van Halen on the radio stations that I was listening to at the time. Casey Kasem, the bubblegum station, the top 40, that wasn't being played too much with Van Halen at the time.
Yeah.
The big station in town was WEBN, and I put them a shout out in the book. That was music for the older guys, the AC/DC, the Molly Hatchet. I didn't really know who those bands were. I was oblivious.
Right.
Yeah.
But then Jump came out. I run up and buy the album. 5 months later, now I have 3 albums in the rear of Van Halen. Now that's opening up the doors to, man, these guys are unbelievable. They're better than what I ever thought that they were going in reverse. Right. I thought the only good song that they had was Panama, Hot for Teacher, Jump, all those music videos that everybody saw on MTV. But now I'm working in backwards.
Yeah.
And then I'm working
That's
forward.
actually kind of cool. That's actually kind of cool that you went backward,
I had to go backwards. Right.
Yeah.
So when someone says to me, are you a Van Halen fan? I am 100% sold on Van Halen. I don't care who the lead singer is. I am 100% sold. I will buy Gary's. I will buy David's. I will buy everybody out there and Sammy's.
There's
very good
refreshing
songs,
to hear.
Right, because there's very good songs catered by Van Halen.
Yeah.
Then there's great songs by Van Halen. Then there's awesome songs by Van Halen. And then there's the tippy top, the pinnacle, the most over the top. It just gets you going. I mean, I could clean the house for hours if I listened to like 8 of those songs in a loop. I could keep going and going and going and going and going. So I am hooked on Van Halen from start to finish. I don't compare apple to oranges. I don't do that. I don't think that's fair for me because Alex blew me away on the drums. Eddie blew me away on the guitar. Michael Anthony blew me away on the bass. David Lee Roth was center stage. He was the point man. I was 20 feet away from him. All of those guys were doing this the whole concert. Up, down, around. Michael Anthony came across with his Jack Daniels bass. He was on a wire. He threw the thing down and jumped on top of it. I mean, Eddie's running around without a shirt on. Well, it's the same energy I felt when I worked backwards to Women and Children, Fair Warning, Van Halen 2, Van Halen 1, and then OU 812, 5150, Balance. I felt the same energy because Van Halen gave me the best one-night program I had ever seen in my life.
That's awesome.
And I couldn't keep going because every time I hear Eddie, every time I hear Van Halen, every time I hear 5150, every time I hear Jump, Van Halen is right there at the epicenter.
Yeah.
It would crush me to say to myself, I don't like anything after 1984.
Right.
That would be so deceitful to what Eddie brought to the stage that night.
100%.
And what Alex did and what Michael did.
Yeah.
That would be so, they gave me so much. So when Sammy came on board, they were still just as powerful, just a different front man. And he sounded great too.
Yeah,
he did to me. But in David's benefit, David's the one that introduced me. If you talk to somebody maybe a couple years younger than me, they were first introduced to Sammy. Well, they're going to feel the same way, but they're still going to thank David for being a part of that.
right.
It's just the way it's got to be. If you're a
Absolutely.
fan, you're a fan. I love them. Even if you say, oh, that song stinks. That's a remake of Happy Trails. That's so minuscule. Well, that's still Van Halen. It's still on
Right.
Diver Down. I mean, I love it. Happy Trails. I mean,
Yeah.
they're all right there swinging back and forth. I mean, sayonara till next time. And then there was a next time. So, yeah, Tanner, I think that's just the way it's got to be. It's like anybody that's introduced to anybody popular today, Foo Fighters, Taylor Swift, if you hear them for the first time, you're going to have to work backwards. You're just going to have to.
Right.
Michael Jackson, same thing back in the day. If you heard Billie Jean the first time or Beat It or Thriller, all of a sudden you're like, holy cow, is that Eddie Van Halen on that song? I think that is. Well, then you're going to work backwards. And if you enjoy it and they blow you away, they got you reeled in forever. And money coming at them like crazy. And they thank you for it.
Yeah. I always say any Van Halen is better than no Van Halen. That's how
Yes.
That's it. Any Van Halen is better than no Van Halen. So that's how I look at it. You know,
that is correct. You are 100% right, John. It's just the way it is. I mean, when Eddie Van Halen passed away, we're never supposed to be in awe of celebrities. We're just not. You know, you never saw them, you never knew them. They weren't a part of your family or anything like that. Well, I disagree with those authors and critics. I was 20 feet away from Eddie Van Halen. I mean, I couldn't get much closer than that. And Skip Berger and Chris Berger actually interacted with him.
Right.
So with our buddies, so when we got word that Eddie Van Halen passed away, that really hit home. I mean, I got his autograph. My best friend met him. My best friend's dad shook his hand. My best friend's dad guarded his wife. I mean, that really hit home. I mean, it really did.
Jim, you know what hit me in the book is when you the way you worded it in the book there was like Chris's father and him, his father knew Eddie Van Halen for a short time. I think that's the way you put it. He knew him for a short time. That's the best way to put it. He didn't know him, but he knew him for a short time. That stuck out at me the way it was written in the book. I
appreciate that.
As you said it, yeah.
And it has to be celebrated. You know, I met Pete Rose quite a few times. That was my hero. When Pete Rose passes away, a part of me is going to go. I woke up with his being on TV every day, Big Red Machine, baseball. So a part of me is going to be very sad.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with Van Halen. When Eddie passed away, when Van Halen broke up, I was sad. I was. I mean, it just was. It's the way they were for the Beatles for my parents. My parents were pissed. I mean, pissed that the Beatles broke up. Still, even both of my parents are passed away now, and my dad even mentioned it last summer, right before he passed away. I can't believe those damn guys broke up. They were awesome. Because he saw them a couple times in Cincinnati. He saw them at Crosley Field, the Reds' old stadium.
Wow.
And then a lot of his friends saw him at the Cincinnati Gardens when it first opened back in 1965. So they felt a part of it. So they were crushed, but they got to say they saw him, right?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, that's what I keep encouraging everybody to do this summer. I feel like that all the radio stations, all the interviews I've done, I encourage everybody, go catch Sammy and Michael this summer. Go see them. Go see Wolfgang and just have a blast and just capture that moment, because we don't know what's going to happen the next summer. We might not ever see him again. They might be done.
That's it, right?
And that's the last time we could ever catch them. So catch them again. Don't be that one that says, oh, it's always next year. And then they break up or they go their separate ways. They're on a booze cruise right now.
Yeah.
Michael and Sammy are on.
Saw that, yeah.
That'd be kind of fun to go on. I bet you that would be pretty crazy. Man overboard.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But I think that's a blast. That's a testimony to Van Halen.
Yeah.
My brother and I went to a rock concert years ago, back in 1988. We drove all the way to Dayton, Ohio, and the guy just sat there.
Yeah.
And it was awful. It was. I mean, he and I drove all the way back, and we're like, "What did we even see?" And we never went back. we never bought any more of his stuff either.
Really?
So I think you do get, from a customer service angle, which we the fans are, you have to be literally blown away when there's such a hype. It'd be like going to see Star Wars and you're waiting in line to see Star Wars. Nobody in line has a clue. And you come out and it's awesome. Then you got those Star Wars fans that say, well, I'm going to wait 9 months. And then they hear all the bits and pieces from all their friends over and over and over again. And they're not as blown away seeing it for the first time.
Right.
I mean, to capture that moment for the first time. Because like I said, my parents' friends, my brother's friends, nobody had ever seen Van Halen. I was the first one. I mean, that'd be like saying, Andrew up there is going to watch AC/DC. They're coming right across the street. You're there. You're going to see him blow it up. Or what was the other one? Wolf Mother down there in Australia. When they did the Joker, I mean, they came over to New Zealand for the first time. I'm sure you had friends that said, I'm not going to go see him. And then, boom, the Joker goes to #1. They're like, well, I guess I should have seen him, you know? And it's just awesome. It really is. And you can't take anything away from those musicians for giving us exactly what they thought they would. And they are all musicians. Mm-hmm.
And I think what you talk about, you capture that essence of what this whole experience is about. It's that collective experience. It's that sharing it with your cohort. You know, let's go back to the Beatles. You know, the Beatles, sharing that experience with the Beatles with a lot of people was, you know, part of that, the group going, you know, and it's sharing it together. One of the reasons why Beatlemania was so nuts, so crazy at the start, because it was just this whole group of people. And I think that's for me what it's about too. I've gone to concerts by myself, and I've watched a concert by myself because no one else wanted to go. Is it the same as going with a group of people? No, it's not. It's, you know, so even from that level, it's you know, there is a difference. But you're right, when you get caught in this tsunami, this event that is huge, that we've all described as a pivotal point in history, music history, not only in America but the world, because you got to remember that Van Halen were huge here with 1984 as well, Jim. You know, I was listening to Van Halen when Diver Down came out, and no one was listening to it. You know, no one was listening to that album. But when Jump came out on the radio, everybody was listening to it. When the video came out and people were going, wow, this guy's good looking. Look at that guy with the blonde hair. You know, he's hot too, you know. And it was like, so as Tanner said, you had girls now listening to this band. Yeah, phenomenal.
Well, it reached all kind of facets of people, you know, like we've talked about, you know, just simply men and women, but, you know, it reached musicians and non-musicians, you know, and then if you break that down even more, you know, like Jump apparently sold more synthesizers than any song that's ever come out or whatever, you know. Everyone that used to either work there or go there to music stores and stuff said that you know, everyone was buying synthesizers after Jump came out, and so, you know, it reached kind of every facet of person. And I think it's so rare to have a band be able to do that while
I'm so glad, Tanner, that it was 1984 and Jump that did it, not Flock of Seagulls. I'm glad that a Flock of Seagulls wasn't responsible.
It's crazy to see a band that can do all that. And that's simply, I mean, every day I swear, you know, people like John and I have arguments on Facebook and stuff about whether Eddie Van Halen is the most influential musician or whatever to us. And for me, it's objective. Like, you've got Eddie's kind of career. You got his musical career, and you've got the innovations he's made as a guitar player, and all the achievements he's made musically. But on top of that, he's selling #1 album songs. And you don't have, people weren't putting pictures. Women weren't putting pictures of Stevie Ray Vaughan in their bedroom. So it's just like, it's unquestionable for me, and it's cool to hear. It's cool to hear about, because honestly, I think the biggest reason why people they cling to different eras of Van Halen is because I think a lot. I mean, especially people that John and I talk to daily, is that everyone that we have on Facebook are musicians. They're guitar players that care so much about Eddie's playing on this album or Eddie's tone on this album. And that's like, that can drive us away from an album, even though it's full of great songs. I mean, notoriously, OU812 in the Van Halen community is an album that doesn't sound very good sonically, but from a non-musician, I like hearing that Van Halen is Van Halen, because you didn't say it, but Van Halen is Van Halen because it's Eddie. And it's history. It doesn't. You can't ignore it. You can't write an album out of history because you didn't like it or whatever. It's all part of a process, and it's all part of the historical process of Van Halen and stuff. So I like hearing that you don't have you loved 84 so much that when Sammy came in 86, you hated the band and never cared at all.
Well, sure, absolutely, because you got to remember, only one person broke up, then left. The other three were intact.
Right.
So, and Sammy with Ted Templeman was already in there, and Sammy already had #2 hits on the Billboard charts, and number 15 hits. I mean, he was right there. I mean, ready to break ground. And let's tell it like it is. I mean, my mom thought that probably Sammy Hagar was a good-looking guy. I mean, he had that red jacket and a flaring guitar and a Ferrari, and it was a cool video. I mean, it really was. I mean, you're right there with Magnum PI, right there with a Ferrari, and now you got Sammy Hagar's Ferrari. I can't drive 55. I mean, it goes very well hand in hand. It just does. It wasn't somebody out in the gutters that they just said, okay, you're next man up. I mean, this has probably been in the works as far as I have read and watching both of your guys' programs for a long time, that if David did and that leave, that possibly, Sammy would be the next one man up, or he would be a candidate. And it wasn't a surprise to a lot of people. But I never knew the back history of Sammy already with Ted Templeman. I didn't know anything of that until I was older. I mean, way older. Like basically doing my research for the book a year and a half ago to back up articles that I had written. I mean, I knew who Ted Templeman was, but I didn't know how all the way down to the basics he was with Sammy. And David getting voice lessons. David had to get him to stay in there. He blew Ted away when he went back to the recording studio. I didn't know any of that. I mean, I had to be well read to back up my information on this book because I don't throw out very many facts. But the facts that I did throw out, I better back it up. If not, I'm going to sound pretty stupid putting a reference or a footnote in there, because my English teacher or professor would be furious if I didn't put a footnote, right?
Yeah. None of us knew that, Jim, though, back then. None of us knew the relationship between Sammy, and the Van Halens. I didn't know who Sammy was back in. I knew who Montrose was, the band. But I didn't know, that Sammy was a singer in that band, John. It wasn't until years later,
right? Yeah, I mean, I knew this on Rock Candy and what was the other one? Bad Motor Scooter. I knew them, and I knew. And it's funny because I think Ted Templeman thought that they fight when he heard that Dave left Van Halen, and I think Ted said to Greg Renoff that he's like, they fight all the time. A few months it'll cool off and they'll get back together and start working on the next album, But when Ted heard Sammy was in the picture, he was concerned about that because he said, this is real, and he loved Sammy. And I think he even said Sammy was the best singer that he maybe ever worked with or something like that. But he didn't want Sammy with Van Halen because he said they were too, unique with Roth and everything like that. But listen, I'll say it again. I always say, I feel like the original Van Halen, they were like a comet. They burned brighter and hotter than everybody else. And they had to implode. It just had to burn out. And that's what they did. In 1984, they burnt out. They were just a comet, a 6-year, 7-8 year, 6-album comet, whatever. And it also allowed Eddie. Eddie didn't seem to be like the guy who looked backwards. He was always looking forward. And he got the opportunity to work with Sammy. He got to write music and songs that he never would have. And now you look at his body of work and you go, oh my gosh, this guy was like, he could do all kinds, different kinds of music and things like that. And Sammy says, don't blame me for the keyboards or the pop stuff. He wrote the music, you know what I mean? So that's the direction that Eddie was moving anyway. So it had nothing to do with it.
Yep.
I'm glad you said that because Eddie needed a change of scenery often, I think. And even down to the fact that, like so many songs were birthed from just jamming on different instruments, piano or even like a new guitar he got that was smaller or bigger or whatever. In general, he needed a change of scenery to continue being creative, and I think it was the best thing for the band. And I assume, I don't think Ted really went deep on it in his book, but I assume that he probably can accept it now that it was probably the best thing for the band, despite his loyalties to David Lee Roth. I think he should. I think we all should. I think it's
now that it's over. Now that it's over, for sure. You think that you look at the whole body of the whole work now, and I think that, like I said, Eddie was a forward-looking guy, and I think even his years with Sammy ran its course at that point, and maybe that was the time for it to end. And Eddie wanted, and obviously on the next album we did after that with Gary Sharon, Eddie wanted to do something totally different. If you wanted to, and I think Eddie was really crushed by the fact that people didn't accept that album. And I really feel that he basically, that's what, besides being sick with cancer on and off for years after that, I think he was very disillusioned with a lot of his fans at that point because he'd never seen failure in his life. That was a failure. And I think he was very disappointed because he's like, this is where I'm going. Are you coming along for the ride with me? And a lot of people rejected it. They wanted Panama Part 2. And Eddie wasn't interested in writing Panama Part 2. If you like Panama, go listen to Panama. I want to do stuff that I never did. I want to do, more introspective lyrics on my music. I want to write a little, I want to do different things, different sounds and things like that. And I don't think people jumped on board like he had hoped they would, going along for the ride, because like he was pushing forward. And I don't think he ever recovered from that. And I don't think that's why we ever really got another Van Halen album after that. The album that we did get was just, leftover songs from, the early days and leftover songs from like 2002 that, when they tried to have another go with Roth. Those songs were really from that era, the newer ones on there. But I think that Eddie was pretty much disillusioned. And I feel like the 2004 reunion tour with Sammy and the Roth reunion tours were basically just money grabs at that time. I don't think Eddie was really interested in doing Van Halen anymore. And he even said before he passed that had they done that kitchen sink tour, which they were planning on doing, that he was looking forward to putting Van Halen to bed. Like that was the end. And he was looking forward to doing, working with other people and movie soundtracks and things like that. So I think that, I think after the 3 wasn't accepted, I think Eddie was pretty much checked out at that point. And, they hired the Eagles manager, Irving Azoff, and that guy is, they put the Eagles back together, right? Hell froze over, hell was freezing, and he got Roth back in there, and a very tense situation, and he was able to handle all sides there, and they made more money in the last 20 years of the band than they made in the first 30. You know what I mean? So, or whatever, first 20, or so. But I think that's what it was. That's that's at least my viewpoint of the whole story. So I don't really have any regrets. I think they went as far maybe as they could have gone with Dave without, without repeating themselves. You know what I mean? Because in some ways there were limitations to what Eddie could do. And as we know, because the music that he did with Sammy could sing differently and higher and more of a range and things like that. So, I mean, it is what it is. And I mean, I look back with no regrets on anything that happened in the band, even the Gary Sharon era. I enjoyed that album. I was there for the ride. A lot of us are hardcore people. I didn't care. Eddie could have played a cello album of cello music, and I would have bought it, and I would have went and saw him play it. You know what I mean? So I was invested, and that's what happens when all of us with a band, going back to like Jim with you guys when you were kids. You bought that record, you made an investment in that band. They were your band now. Okay. That's your girlfriend. This is my band, and then you go for the ride. You had to go backwards to catch up, to know the history, which you did. And then you went forward with them for the rest of the way. And that's, and that's how music is. And that's how it should be,
Well said. Jim. While he's doing that, folks. Oh, I don't know what happened to Tanner. We'll be wrapping up soon, John, won't we? Anyway, so thank you for that wonderful sort of kind of byway into a conclusion, John. I think you nailed all the points that a lot of us think about this band, and we'll still continue talking about this band to the day we die, I'm sure.
Yeah. I just think that, we all argue with it. I still argue with people online about, the Sammy and the Dave thing. And I like it all, but, I just think it's like, what, listen, it's over. It's just like, it is what it is. Look back on it and just say like, wow, because Sammy was in the band, we have all this different kinds of direction with the band, instead of a band doing the same album over and over again for, 40 years, it's not the same. They grew, you know what I mean? And I think that's one thing when you look back at like the box set or the greatest hits, and you hear a song like, When It's Love or something like that. And then you hear like, Atomic Punk from them. It's like, wow, that's the same band. It's amazing. The breadth, the scope of the music that Eddie wrote. And then you think about all these other bands. Like I argue all the time. Everybody says, oh, Aerosmith is the greatest American rock band. I go, hard rock band. I go, no, they're not. Van Halen was, because Aerosmith after 1986 turned into Bon Jovi. They had Desmond Child writing their songs. Van Halen wrote all their songs from the beginning to the end, aside from the 4 or 5 covers. They wrote all their music. It was those 4 people, whoever the 4 were at the time. But the core generally was Eddie, Alex, and Michael, and maybe just Eddie and Alex was the core for the whole ride of Van Halen. And so that's why I don't, Aerosmith, as great as they were, they're Bon Jovi after 1986. It's the same, the same thing. It's not, anybody who has outside writers, it's, you're not, to me, it's not the same. It's like, that's what made
Bon Jovi. They had outside writers. So I remember taking OU812 to a party, and back in the day we used to have cassettes, Jim, and you'd take them and there'd be a tape deck and you'd be drinking beers with a few mates. And I remember, I don't know who it was, one of our friends had New Jersey was playing on, and another friend of mine came into the party. His name was Terry, just walked up to the cassette, popped it out, threw and threw the cassette outside. And put OU812 on, I'll never forget that, because, Bad Medicine and all that, that was the song that was, big at the time. But even back then, we had an idea of, and I got to be careful how I say this because I don't mind Bon Jovi.
I agree with you. I don't mind them, but it's just not. Real
not the same. A bit of fakery going on.
Yeah, when I look at that Van Halen their box set or their greatest hits or whatever like that, and I see that And I think to myself, like, oh my gosh, the same guy wrote all of this music. One guy, really wrote. Eddie wrote the musical, the music for it. I mean, Alex was a huge contributor to that. Obviously, he was there, the sounding board, bouncing it off him and jamming with him and arranging it all together. But I'm like, this 130 songs or whatever Van Halen has were all written by except for a couple cover songs, all written by Eddie Van Halen. And you can't say that with Aerosmith. You can't say that with any
Bon
of
Jovi.
Bon Jovi,
Right.
That genre.
Right.
Well, to me, there's no question they're the greatest hard rock band. And, and they're on the Mount Rushmore of bands anyway. I think, people realize that. I always say they're the American Led Zeppelin, Van Halen. To me, that's what they are,
Right.
Yep.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So,
right.
Yeah. They weren't, they're not a band, again, Aerosmith and Bon Jovi, they were hired. They were hired by John Bon Jovi. The guitar player did what the lead singer told him to do, and look,
Right.
and that's okay, but, Van Halen, there was some chemistry going on. When the lead singer told the guitar player what to do, the guitar player turned around and told the lead singer what to do, I like that. That's what a band should be doing. Yeah.
Exactly.
And,
all the years
and we
later,
knew that.
We find out all the years later that the bass player in Bon Jovi never played on any of the records.
Never.
And
Never.
And there was a
What's going
session
on
guy
there?
who's actually in the band now. The session guy who played on even as far back as the big hits, "Living on a Prayer." It was this guy playing
Yes.
bass on all that. Now he's actually in the band, which I was like, well, at least that's a good sign. You know what I mean for them. But I don't.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
just you can't compare. Like when a band writes their own music, and it's just I don't know. I think that they're more special. A band that does that. So
Sure. Absolutely.
Tanner's internet is just shit the bed, so he won't be coming on. So I think, look, guys, we're at the 2-hour mark, so it's probably, Jim, a good time for us to wrap up the show and say thank you for coming on and sharing your experiences. And we'll be sharing the link of your book on a lot of social media posts, if you don't mind, and on our Instagram accounts and our YouTube and also our Facebook groups. We've got one Facebook group that has about 13,000 members, so I'll be sharing that link in this video over there.
Well, thank you, Andrew and John. Thank you.
You'll come back. You'll come back on another show.
Absolutely. And if Van Halen hears this, I want to thank them. I want to thank Michael, Sammy, Alex, and David, and to the rock god upstairs, Eddie. You gave us the best night ever, and that's why we had to write a book, a 236-page thank you card, because of what you gave not only us, but my school, my ball team, and all the fans throughout the world. Thank you. Thank you a million. We really, really cannot thank you enough. You turned me into an avid music fan instead of just a sports guy, so thank you. Mm-hmm.
yeah,
And on that, I think we should end the show soon, Johnny.
highly recommend it. Everybody, go check this book out. Get it.
Thank you.
All right, Jim. Thanks again for coming on.
Have a great week. Take care.
Don't go away. Don't go away, Jim. We're going to play the outro video. Please don't go anywhere.
Yes, sir.
Thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe, and we'll subscribe back to you. Thank you for watching.